Morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. What a show we have ready to go for you here today. Two great guests. It's Jake Fromm before we're done. We always love our chance to speak to him as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take, and it's Connor Riley today, too. We would say the conversation with Connor is important. We are getting the final sort of finishing touches put on Georgia's preseason preparations. How does all that stand here right now? How ready is Georgia for the season that's about to begin? We'll hear from Kirby Smart one more time today, kind of leading into game week next week, and Connor will sort of tell us what the mood, the situation is in Athens. All of that comes up here in a little bit. For myself, I've got a few sort of leftover unanswered questions for Georgia. We're going to highlight some of those on the program here today. And off the top, one thing I don't think anybody is talking about nearly enough for Georgia. There is a game that gets less attention than some of the other games that Georgia will play. But from a certain vantage point, it may be more important than all of them, and it may set the tone for the entire season for Georgia. Why is that? Which game am I talking about? We will begin things today by discussing that. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Over the course of the last day or so, I've been thinking a lot about Georgia's game at Tennessee in a couple of weeks. I'm obviously excited about our DawgNation invasion, but I've been thinking about it for reasons beyond that. I think the starting point for me on this is that, okay, we got week 0 action this weekend. We're kind of ready for that. Just some college football back in our lives. That just feels like a good thing, doesn't it? And then beyond that, okay, well, it's week 1. There's all these like great week 1 games highlighted by Texas, Ohio State. But we also know, for those of us who sort of live and die with Georgia football, we sort of have to wait a couple of weeks to see our team play the kind of game that matters the way that these like LSU, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas, Miami, Notre Dame, the way these games kind of populate week 1. We got to wait a couple of weeks to get there. It's a Marshall and Austin Peay as tune-ups before Georgia goes to Tennessee. But when you start thinking, well, okay, well, that's still only a couple of weeks away, and I've, for whatever reason, just been kind of fixated on that game. And here is the conclusion that I've drawn. I think this Georgia-Tennessee game is a major storyline for Georgia here this year. And despite the fact that people kind of get fixated on the game after that for Georgia, home against Alabama, because it's the sort of home game that Georgia fans have been waiting for a long time. Alabama's never played at Georgia during the Kirby Smart era. There's also a lot of backstory between Georgia and Bama, and frankly, Georgia would like to kind of correct some of that and be better against the Crimson Tide moving forward than they have been in the past. So because of all that, Georgia-Alabama gets a lot more attention. In November, the Georgia-Texas game gets a lot of attention. Part of that's because Texas with Arch Manning has just gotten so much attention during the offseason. It's also because Georgia beat, stop me if you've heard this, Texas twice last year. This is the chance for Texas to kind of come into Athens as a member of the SEC. The stories around that game sort of write themselves. Of course, it's going to get a lot of attention. But can I try to make a case with you about something here just for a moment, that for all of the justifiable hype as Georgia hosts Alabama and Georgia hosts Texas, I think there are some pretty significant reasons why the Georgia-Tennessee game, middle part of September, September 13th, is probably as big as the other games, if not from a certain vantage point, bigger. I think it's a majorly overlooked game for Georgia. I think it's a majorly overlooked storyline for Georgia. I think a lot about what Georgia will be in this upcoming season is going to be determined by kind of how it goes against Tennessee. So let me walk you through 3 of these here really quick. Starting with this. One of the things that we hear asked about Georgia a lot in this offseason is, are we sure Georgia is still Georgia? And some of that kind of comes across as like concern trolling, if you know what that is. And frankly, that kind of question does, I will admit, kind of get on my nerves just a little bit. And one of the reasons why it kind of gets on my nerves is because I would say while Georgia has been at sort of most Georgia best, it has not always been easy to get the sort of media types that asks these sort of questions to acknowledge exactly what Georgia is. When Georgia's beating everybody and laying waste to all of its competition, when it's going on a long winning streak of frankly winning like non-conference games by wide margins, sometimes it was sort of hard to see Georgia get the credit for all of that while it was happening. Now that it seems like there's a certain kind of media person that sort of only wants to acknowledge what Georgia was, now that it seems like that's sort of safely in the past tense. Perhaps you've noticed that. I would say that I have. So the question of, well, are we sure Georgia is still Georgia? I must admit there is a part of that sort of gets on my nerves. And yeah, I also have to admit the objective side of me, the objective portion of my brain. I have to admit, it is not an unfair question to ask whether or not Georgia is still as dominant as it was circa 2021 and 2022 and into 2023 when it was going on like, a 30-game winning streak. It's not a completely unfair question to ask, is Georgia still as dominant as it was then? And if we treat the question somewhat seriously of, well, is Georgia still Georgia? The simplest way to prove that is to do the things that Georgia typically does. And I don't know that there's anything more Georgia in recent years than what Georgia has done at Tennessee. Georgia has a long winning streak against the Vols, not just winning games at Neyland Stadium, but winning them with some dominance. And frankly, this is something that others have noticed. There was a story at ESPN.com. This is going back to the summer. This is a few weeks old by now. It's one of those things we never had a chance to talk about. But in one of their pieces where they looked at, the swing games, they call them, for each of the preseason top 25 teams, our guy Mark Schleybaugh had a write-up about the Georgia game against Tennessee there. And in the write-up, he made mention of what I just talked about, the kind of dominance that Georgia has shown while playing at Neyland Stadium, saying that's the Georgia swing game this year on September 13th. He goes on to say, after hosting Marshall and the FCS program Austin Peay to start the season, Bulldogs play an early SEC road game at Tennessee on September 13th. Schleybaugh goes on to say it'll be a significant road test for starting quarterback Gunnar Stockton and the offense playing in one of the most intimidating road environments in the SEC. Schleybaugh, who knows the history, writes, the Volunteers dominated the Bulldogs throughout the 90s, but Georgia has flipped the script, winning 8 in a row and 13 of the past 15 contests in the series. Also, the Bulldogs won each of their past 4 games at Neyland Stadium by at least 24 points. And that's the point we're trying to make here, is that if Georgia is still Georgia, one of the most Georgia things of all is dominating at Neyland Stadium, winning games at Tennessee by wide margins. Did it in 2017, 2019, 2021, most recently in 2023. That is what Georgia has done. And as Schleybaugh, alludes to, well, it may be just a little bit harder this year because one of the things we heard from Kirby Smart, talking about how tough it was playing on the road last season, at Ole Miss, for instance, at Alabama, for instance. Now it's at Tennessee. Schleybaugh calls it a, quote, intimidating road environment. And all of a sudden you got brand new starting quarterback Gunnar Stockton playing there. But it's also true in this particular game that while Stockton is the newish starting quarterback for Georgia, the guy that he's facing, Aguilar, on the other side for Tennessee, we discussed Joey Aguilar being named as the Tennessee starter yesterday. It's not like Aguilar's got much more big game experience than Stockton does. He may have more experience in total, but he certainly has far less big game experience. So a great way for Georgia to show that it's still Georgia is going on the road to Tennessee, at least winning this game once again. If it can win it with some margin, then boy, that sends a big message to those who are just not quite so sure about what Georgia is. Continuing this streak of success at Neyland Stadium, they want to believe they have the loudest fans in the SEC. They want to believe they have the toughest place to play in the SEC. Georgia has certainly confounded that. It'd be really fun to see Georgia do that again. Now, here's reason number 2. By the time Georgia plays at Tennessee in September on September 13th, we will be guaranteed to have seen 3 top 10 teams at least lose games. We may see more. We'll be guaranteed to see 3 preseason top 10 teams have lost by then. Miami plays Notre Dame, one of those teams will lose. LSU plays Clemson, one of those teams will lose. Ohio State plays Texas. We wish they both could lose, but one of those teams will lose. So that's 3 of your top 10 that will have lost by the time that Georgia goes to Tennessee September 13th, which means that if Georgia wins that game against Tennessee, suddenly the sort of winds in Georgia's sail, WINDS, the wind in Georgia's sail, all of a sudden the sort of national profile of UGA will get a pretty significant boost once you sort of look at preseason top 10 teams that have sort of already faltered. Georgia will have gone on the road and gotten one of its big marquee wins. All of a sudden, you'll just sort of notice the national conversation around UGA will sort of slightly start to change. Now, some of you don't like that. You call that rat poison, and I sort of get that to a degree. That's fine. But it's just another signal of just how important it would be to kind of be sitting midpoint of September already with one of your road wins kind of in hand, while at least 3 other preseason top 10 teams have kind of already suffered losses. The fortunes for Georgia in terms of how it's perceived, but also in terms of the path ahead of it, would just be kind of far different if Georgia's sitting at 3-0, while at least 3 other preseason top 10 teams will have already sustained losses. Which kind of brings me to sort of my final point. We have said a lot that we believe that the Georgia schedule for this upcoming season here in 2025 is probably just as tough as it was a year ago. It kind of doesn't seem that way to a lot of people because, well, the Texas and the Alabama and the Ole Miss game, now they're at home. But people sort of forget, well, yeah, but a team like Auburn could be better. A team like Florida could be better. That it wouldn't take much for the Georgia schedule, when you actually play it out, to be just as tough as the perception of the Georgia schedule a year ago. That wouldn't be a hard thing to kind of conjure up. But let me give you a little bit of a different perspective on that, of how the Georgia schedule can actually kind of work out in UGA's favor, once again, kind of taking it all back to the Tennessee game. If Georgia wins that game, not only will it be, we would presume, 3-0 in the season, it'll also be 1-0 on the road. That is a very big deal if you start thinking about Georgia's overall playoff chances. As someone who's relatively high on Georgia, certainly optimistic about their chances to return to the college football playoff, but also respects the schedule that Georgia plays, I've told you before, if you would give me 10-2 right now, I believe I'd take it. Some of you might hold out with the belief that Georgia could be a slightly more ambitious 11-1 or 12-0, and maybe you might be right. I'm pretty skeptical of that, but maybe you might be right. For me, if I was given the gift of, hey, BA, here's a magic wand, you can wave it over the season, your team's 10-2, I'd take it right now. Because 10-2 gets me back in the college football playoff. 10-2 last year in the regular season was a recipe for Ohio State to go on and win the national championship. No reason why that couldn't be true for Georgia here this year. I would take 10-2 and run with it if I possibly could for Georgia here this year. Now, if you start really kind of gaming this out, what is a recipe for getting to 10-2? In sort of simple terms, it's go 2-0 with your 2 neutral games, against Florida, against Georgia Tech. Go 6-1 at home. You'd like to be undefeated, but given the slate that you play, 6-1 at home might feel about right. And find a way to maybe go 2-1 on the road. Because keep in mind, Georgia only plays 3 true road games this year. That's the one way in which the schedule makers did kind of do Georgia a favor. And one of those games, while you don't like to project too much, but let's face it, we're sort of allowed to, one of those games is against Mississippi State, who we sort of perceive to be the worst team on paper in the entire SEC. So if I am correct and the recipe for making the playoff is 2-0 with neutrals, 6-1 at home, 2-1 on the road, what if 3 games into the season, 25% of the way through the regular season, what if you've already got a road win in hand? What if all of a sudden now you're looking ahead to 9 games remaining in your regular season, knowing that you'll only play 2 of those in somebody else's stadium? Well, all of a sudden now, if you did want to be more ambitious to say, maybe this team can be better than 10-2, maybe this team can go undefeated in road games, And maybe this team can put more effort into these like big marquee home games that the entire nation's going to be paying attention to. All of a sudden that becomes a little bit more of a realistic conversation. But it all hinges on what happens against Tennessee. Now, the caveat here is, of course, and you already know this, Georgia could lose to Tennessee and still go on to do everything else it wants to do this season. It kind of fought back from a deficit after losing at Alabama in September a year ago. That's all true, but you also know this because you lived through last year. That is a very hard way to go about your business. You don't want to be putting yourself in a scenario where you're playing must-win games any sooner than you have to. And that's why this game against Tennessee is gigantic. The Alabama game gets more attention. The Texas game gets more attention. Heck, even rivalry games such as like Auburn, Florida, Georgia Tech, they may even to a degree at times get more attention. But in terms of the biggest, to use the phrase that ESPN used, swing in the fortunes for Georgia this year because of where it falls in the calendar, Tennessee may be the big one. We got to wait a couple of weeks for it. A lot of these other teams will be playing marquee games right out of the gate. Georgia will wait a couple of weeks. But by the time we get to September the 13th, we are going to find out an awful lot about these Georgia Bulldogs. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Boy, what a thrill and a pleasure it is to have you as a part of our show here today as we start to look ahead. And I just love it this time of year because we're like right at the doorstep of it. It doesn't feel like so far into the future anymore. It just feels like we're right here at it, and I just can't wait. Obviously, the final sort of finishing touches on preseason preparations happening at Georgia in Athens here right now. In fact, we've got plenty on the show for you about that here today. But as a lead into all of that, let me also give a shout out to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. You know, at some point in time this season for Georgia, there's going to be a mess to be cleaned up. Too many turnovers in a game, or somebody gets hurt, or just all kinds of like misfortune and adversity can befall you if you're a football team. That's a fact. It's going to happen. Well, guess what? Our friends at ServPro know all about that too. In fact, in very serious situations like when a fire breaks out or when the water, we're coming up on a time of year, unfortunately, where stormy weather, along our friends in the coast, hurricanes, obviously that kind of creates a lot of, tough weather inland sometimes. In this sort of stormy weather situation, when there's a huge damage created by that, our friends at ServPro kind of exist to kind of work with you on that too. Whatever has kind of caused you catastrophic damage to your property, fire, water intrusion, weather-related, whatever it might be, the restoration specialists from ServPro want to help you get it cleaned back up and kind of restored to its previous condition. That's why they're called restoration specialists after all. And this is like for large-scale jobs. I've actually seen some of their mobile command centers and things like that. It's amazing. It almost looks like a NASCAR hauler, gigantic truck, kind of inside there, room and space for like multiple people to kind of run point on the cleanup, working with the insurance companies if need be. And they can do that for large scale jobs. And frankly, if that's the kind of, world you live in, you ought to keep them in mind. But if it's a more small scale thing, if it's like the other day I told you, we were like doing this, just cooking some steaks on the cast iron, and suddenly flames kind of popped up. Thankfully, we got them put out, but that's how quickly something can kind of go wrong. You just when you sort of least expect it. And if you've got that sort of damage in your home, it may seem like a smaller scale job, but frankly, you want it cleaned up, fixed up, and put back together. Our friends at ServPro can do that for you too. So please find them online, servpro.com, SERV, servpro.com for a lot more on that today. So we just talked a lot about the Georgia game against Tennessee. Big deal here coming up. That means we want to see you for our DawgNation invasion leading into it. If it's the big game for Georgia, DawgNation wants to be at its best. And there's nothing we've ever done that's been better than this DawgNation invasion of the Tennessee River. The kind of classic paddle wheel riverboat up and down the Tennessee River, enjoying the food on the boat, the bar on the boat, drink tickets to enjoy those beverages. First 125 to sign up, get the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt, hanging out with the DawgNation crew, some of the best Georgia fans you'll ever tailgate with, and a tailgate experience, frankly, unlike any you can get anywhere else. We're painting Knoxville red and black for the DawgNation Invasion, the Tennessee River. Tennessee fans hate it, but guess what? If they're in a bad mood, that means we must be doing something right. And Georgia has done a lot right in Knoxville for a very long time. 4 straight wins, 24-point average. We think that Georgia can do it again, but Georgia fans got to be there to give them good vibes. That means it starts with the DawgNation Invasion tailgate on the Tennessee River. So check out DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that today. All right, we got Connor Raleigh here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today. Presented by our friends Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. We love having them as a part of the program. In fact, the response to Mercier Orchards Hard Cider thus far has been amazing. I'm going to show you that as a part of our Golden Shoe a little later on today. Just really, really proud of how all of this is going. We'll tell you more about that here coming up. For now, though, as a lead-in to Connor joining us in a moment, looking at the situation from Athens, I want to address what I think right now are, I believe, a couple of unanswered questions for Georgia. In other words, if the game against Tennessee, we just talked about it, if it's closer than it's used to being, what are some of the issues that Georgia's dealing with that might cause that to be true? Or if Georgia were to stumble at some point in time this year, what are some things that Georgia needs to figure out now to make that less likely then? Well, I told you one of these yesterday, that while I'm really excited about Nate Frazier, while I now believe that Dwight Phillips is probably going to be playing for Georgia, I think, in some sort of significant role, I think that Bo Walker's likely to play, I think that we're still not quite sure. I think a major unanswered question for Georgia remains, who's going to get those sort of tough, hard, dirty yards, as Mike Bobo called them the other day, kind of in between the tackles? We thought that might be Josh McCray's role, and it still might be, but it sounds like McCray is still kind of working his way back to game shape after dealing with an illness to begin fall camp. So on the list of unanswered questions for Georgia, one of those has to be, exactly where do things stand with the running game right now? As a reminder, this is what Kirby Smart said about McCray and the other running backs going back to last week.
Yeah, I don't know that he's behind. I think the biggest thing is just getting in shape, caught up to speed, reps, volume, pickups, words, all those things, and he continues to push to get where he needs to. At running back, pleased with where those guys are. At scrimmages where we got the tackle live, all those guys continue to compete. The biggest thing is staying healthy so we can develop depth at that position.
So there you go. You know, McCray, is he there or not? If it's not McCray, well, is it Roderick Robinson or who is that guy that kind of runs between the tackles? For Georgia right now, I would say we don't quite know the answer to that yet. I would say a similar thing is true when it comes to another position we mentioned yesterday. I've told you that, you know, for me, it's been a little quiet around the Georgia defensive line thus far this summer. That doesn't necessarily mean bad things, but we just sort of notice what we don't hear. And as I told you yesterday, I would kind of put the outside linebacker, the edge rusher, into that sort of similar category of what Georgia's doing up front defensively. Where do things stand with outside linebacker right now? One of the guys who's supposed to make a major contribution, certainly got plenty of attention from media kind of outside the DawgNation bubble when he first arrived, was Elo Mendoza, the transfer from Army. How is he fitting into the picture here right now? Kirby Smart also talked about that last week.
Elo's still finding his way in the defense in terms of knowledge, understanding leverages. You know, he's playing a little bit different role than he played at his place, so he's adjusted to that. I love his work ethic. I love the way he competes. He's twitchy, and he's going against two good tackles every day in our guys.
So, okay, Mendoza's a part of this. It sounds like Chris Jones is a part of this. Quintarius Johnson has sort of been a part of this, but who's standing out? You know, who's ready to kind of make the big impact plays? I would say edge rusher, a little bit like defensive line. Overall for Georgia, sort of seems like a question yet to be answered. Seems like it's been a little quiet on that front. One sort of slightly different point to make before we bring on Connor. Another question that seems like it hasn't been answered yet, although I don't know there's any real huge reason for concern because it seems like it's a pretty good competition. Georgia's looking for a starting safety opposite K.J. Bolden. Ja'Cory Thomas is the guy who's been here. It seems like Zion Branch to a degree, and maybe even more so Adrian Maddox, the transfer from UAB. It seems like they're sort of vying for their moment too. In fact, there's a chance that Maddox may actually win this job. Last week, Kirby Smart also talked about him as well.
Yeah, I think he's learned. He's more comfortable in the defense. The checks, the things we put on a safety are probably greater than any position outside of linebacker and quarterback. And so he's more comfortable in practice whenever he had 15, and then 10 or 11. So he's around 25, 26. He's much more comfortable than he was in the spring. He has some really good redeeming qualities. He's passionate. He's instinctive. He runs to the ball hard. He plays hard. He has a knack for getting balls out, but he's got to play within the defense and understand leverages and what we call not playing rat trap. He's got to consistently do that to play winning football. But I'm very excited about what the future holds for him.
So let me see if I can sum all of this up. I think from right there, you see kind of three examples, at least three, there may be more, of kind of unanswered questions for Georgia as they get ready to move into, fall camp is sort of over now. It's sort of preseason prep for the actual first game. They'll kind of do some of that over the course of the next couple of weeks, the remainder of this week, obviously into game week next week. Who is the starter at safety opposite KJ Bolden? We know the inside linebackers are good, but how about the others in the front seven? Defensive line plus outside linebacker. Where does that stand right now? And who's going to get you those sort of hard, dirty, nasty yards, kind of between the tackles that kind of make third down more manageable and kind of allow you to kind of sustain more drives than maybe you did a year ago? I would count all three of those as pretty significant unanswered questions for Georgia here right now compared to other position groups that, rightly or wrongly, we just sort of feel like we know more about. Now, of course, this. Just because it's an unanswered question doesn't mean that it's a negative. A lot of these may have very positive answers put on display for us once the games start being played. But they do kind of count as unknowns for now. And of course, because of that, we're definitely going to have our eyes on them. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. So you've heard us talk a lot about this over the course of the last couple of weeks. Our newest sponsor as a part of what we're doing here. We've had great success in the past. We've introduced you to brand new beverages. And this year, we're doing this with our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. This is especially important to me because I love the agricultural community we have here in Georgia. I'm so proud of that. And right there in beautiful Blue Ridge, Georgia, is where Mercier Orchards exists. I'm about a couple of 100 acres of apple trees and things like that just sort of stretch all over this kind of mountainous terrain. It's gorgeous. It's one of the most serene experiences you can ever have to go visit there. Well, many of you can't go to Blue Ridge, but you can have Blue Ridge come to you when you try the delicious flavor of Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. It comes in a can. It's an incredible category of beverage that, of course, if you buy it in the store, it comes in a can. You can also drink it at the tap if you're in a restaurant, something like that. But at the local supermarket you go to, at the beverage store you frequent, I want you to look for this delicious hard cider, Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Whether it's the Grumpy Granny, kind of a tart flavor, the Just Peachy, that is kind of got the sweet flavor, kind of the peach to go along with that. It's one of the most amazing flavor experiences that you're ever going to have. We are so proud to have Mercier Orchards Hard Cider as a part of DawgNation Daily here and Around the Doghouse. The response to this from you has been amazing. We'll give you more on that before our show is done today. And we want everybody to look for it. And if you haven't found it, we want you to ask for it. Mercier Orchards. In fact, let me see that website on the screen one more time. It's mercier-orchards.com. Mercier is spelled M-E-R-C-I-E-R. Mercier-orchards.com to find out more about this today. We love having them as a part of Around the Doghouse. We love having all of you with us here today as well. We love having two great guests. It's Jake Fromm before we're done. And for now, as a lead into Kirby Smart, we'll speak later on, and the final kind of finishing touches on Georgia's preseason preparation. Let's talk to Connor Riley here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me say hello to Connor Riley, getting ready for, obviously, game week 2 Saturdays from now, putting the pieces together, what we have been hearing as Georgia kind of goes through all of this. And Connor, just before you joined us, talked a little bit about some of what I think are kind of lingering sort of unanswered questions for Georgia here right now. And one of those I've been mentioning a little bit lately is what's happening for Georgia at the running game. I think that Nate Frazier has a chance to have a very good season for Georgia. At one point in time, I was sort of saying 1,000 yards. I then kind of backed off that and said, maybe still more ensemble cast, the way that it's always been. But when you look at some of the running backs around Frazier right now, I would say that picture is still a little bit murky. Doesn't mean it's going to be bad, I don't think. But in terms of who's going to get the sort of hard yards in between the tackles that allows Georgia to sustain drives, I don't think we quite know that yet. I haven't heard a ton about Roderick Robinson this offseason. Sounds like Josh McCray is kind of working his way back to playing shape after battling an illness. I would say a Dwight Phillips is going to probably play for Georgia. That's a little bit different kind of player that I'm talking about here. Would you agree that there is still a lot about Georgia's running game that we sort of don't know?
Yeah, and I think maybe the biggest answer to that question is like, what do we see from Bo Walker, a freshman running back who, for a lot of really good things about, but he's not in that same 225, 240 pound range, the bruiser sort of going to run hard. Now, Dejon Edwards wasn't necessarily that either, but also Edwards had the ability to work up into sort of being that guy that could handle the punishment and move the pile. And so to expect Bo Walker to come in and do that right away, I think that's a mighty big ask. And the reality is, look, someone like Josh McCray, who there was questions about his conditioning when he showed up to camp. That's maybe why he's had a slow start here. Georgia, I think, really needs him in that game against Tennessee and ready for that game against Tennessee. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a moving of the goalpost. We thought that this was a guy that was going to come in and help spell Nate Frazier there. I do disagree with you that I think Frazier still needs to be the 1,000-yard running back for Georgia. They haven't had one since DeAndre Swift in 2019. And I think that he's certainly capable of doing that. But based off what we've heard coming out of fall camp, Frazier, I think, has had a very strong camp. I would put Bo Walker as someone who's had a good camp. But those big bruisers, Chauncey Bowens, Roderick Robinson, Josh McCray, it just doesn't seem like we can really count on them or expect to count on them when Georgia opens the season against Marshall in a few weeks here.
Yeah, to be clear, I mean, I was all about like the big individual season from Frazier, kind of making the comparison to DeAndre Swift in 2019. Then I sort of softened that because I thought bringing in Josh McCray was a big deal. And Roderick Robinson being seemingly healthy again, I thought that was a big deal. It may still prove to be a big deal, but Connor, I always pay attention to what we're not hearing. And boy, on some of those guys, we're just not hearing very much. And it's at least noticeable. What does it mean? I don't know, but it's at least noticeable to me.
Yeah, the defensive line is probably, to me, the biggest position of concern right now coming out of fall camp, and just the lack of what we've heard around them. But the running back position as a whole is not too far behind. Now, can Georgia get creative and find ways to, open up the run game a little bit more, get guys like a Dylan Bell, Cash Jones, Dwight Phillips, you mentioned earlier? Absolutely. And I think they're going to be doing that. But to your point, and I do share this concern as well, who's just going to be the guy who gets you 4 yards on first down, gets you 5 yards on first down, and puts you in a much easier situation? And I don't know that running back exists right now. And look, I love Nate Frazier. I think he's going to have a great season here for Georgia. But you're not going to be wanting to put 20-plus carries on him every single game over the course of the season. He's just not built that way. If any running back is built to sustain that level of physicality. And so that's why, it's the lack of supporting cast around Frazier right now at that running back position, where Roderick Robinson, it's his third year in the program. Josh McCray is a guy you went out and added via the transfer portal. You thought you would have some sort of veteran there. And the fact that Bo Walker, who we talked about earlier, is the guy that's sort of seen as the number 2 running back right now, at least in terms of what he brings from a rushing standpoint, I do think that's mildly concerning, especially given how much we've heard Georgia talk about the importance of having a great running game this season.
So you mentioned the defensive line. That's been a big issue for us the last couple of days here too. And same thing I'll say about that I said about the running game. It's just sort of quiet. And for me, I'm going to count edge rusher, outside linebacker into the same discussion. I told this to John Stinchcomb yesterday. A lot of this for me goes to dominance. I have seen enough to believe that Georgia's going to be really good this year. In fact, I think it's quite possible that Georgia is as good this year as it was a year ago, which was good enough to make the college football playoff, win the SEC. So that's no small feat, just to repeat the quality that you had last season. But Georgia fans want more than that. They would like for this team to be kind of more dominant the way that it was in its national championship era. And for me, a lot of that sort of centers around, well, can you get back to being just really fierce up front defensively? I'll include edge rusher in that. And I just think for right now, that is a big unknown. Now, of course, it's an unknown because we hadn't seen games. But boy, comparatively, inside linebacker, I'm assuming that Georgia feels pretty good about its secondary. I would just sort of say that this is more than just sort of a normal level of unknown to begin a season. It is just really, really quiet about defensive line, edge rusher. As a fan, as a hardcore partisan that wants Georgia to win every game, and you said it a moment ago, and I'm going to echo the same thing, this counts as my biggest current concern for Georgia.
I've had a take that I haven't wanted to share for public consumption over the offseason, but with what we've seen from this group in particular this fall, I feel even more strongly about it. I think this defensive line is a year away from being a national championship defensive line. And, Christian Miller can have a great season this year. And I'm not saying he's going to be Jalen Carter, but there's a guy who was second team All-American this week. And so I'll be interested to sort of see how he develops. I do think Gabe Harris is someone who we just don't know how to talk about him exactly because, I think he's going to be an impactful player on both the defensive line and at the outside linebacker position. But where and how that ultimately looks, we don't quite know yet. And we've heard good things about Elijah Griffin and JJ Hanna, and they've done the playing with fire, passion, and energy that you've wanted to hear. But it's all those guys in between that you were really counting on making that leap and putting this Georgia defensive line in a place where it could, I think, contend and possibly win a national championship this year. Your Jordan Halls, Joseph Jonah-Ajayi, Nazir Johnson, Nnamdi Ogboko, those guys second, third year in the programs who – we just haven't really heard much of anything, if at all, from those guys. And maybe look, hey, the Georgia offensive line is that great, and they're just doing an awesome job right now. I'm very skeptical of that. And so something that I've held this offseason where I just think this defensive line is a year away from being national championship caliber. I feel even stronger about that with the lack of positive news we've heard about this group coming out of fall camp.
Yeah, people who know more than I do will tell me that Elijah Griffin, much like his recruiting ranking suggests, is a future game wrecker, right? Like that's the kind of defensive lineman that throws back to the best era for Georgia football in its history. But that may not be as a true freshman, probably won't be. And you probably need more than Griffin to be that guy. And so while I would say the future for Griffin is certainly secure, and there are other good ones in this program, what people are saying about Hannah and obviously Isaiah Gibbs, like there are others that could sort of be there. I think that Griffin has been as advertised, but boy, you'd be asking a lot from him here in this particular year. And how many of the sort of upperclassmen types, the McLeods, the Millers, the Halls, how many of those guys can kind of play at a high enough level for you this year to be better than you were last year? Because up front, for Georgia to be better as a team, that group probably does have to be better than it was last season.
Yeah, and you're replacing three guys that got drafted. Now, Michael Williams didn't have the season I think a lot of people thought he would have. And Warren Brinson and Nas Stackhouse sort of are who they were. But this is a defensive line where, hey, when Georgia's won national championships, it's been chiefly because they've had great defensive linemen. 2021, obviously, probably the greatest defensive line of all time when we look back just in terms of the talent that they had in that room. And then in 2022, Jalen Carter was such a singularly dominant force that it changed the way that opposing offenses had to play around him. Christian Miller can have a great year, and he still won't be on that level of Jalen Carter. And Griffin could potentially one day be that, as he's been hyped up to be. But I just don't believe he's going to get there in year one. That's an unrealistic expectation to expect out of someone who a year ago was playing in, I think, like 2A high school football down there in Savannah. And so it's just, look, it's going to have to be a strength in numbers to performance this year from the defensive line. And the problem is that those numbers in particular just have not played the football necessary, I think, to show that they can excel in SEC play as they're going to have to do over the course of the season.
I want to deal with two issues with you before we let you go. Let me start with this. My prediction is of the open, what I think of starting positions, I'll take Adrian Maddox, I believe, at safety. I think I'm ready to say Ellis Robinson will start at corner, although I do believe that Georgia is still going to rotate pretty liberally there if I had to guess. But I think I'm ready to say that Ellis is going to start at corner, and I'm pretty confident that Juan Gaston is going to start at right guard. Am I leaving out an open position, first of all, and what do you think of those three predictions?
There's not one that jumps to mind. Those are sort of the three big position battles. Maybe you could say who starts at outside linebacker. Like Gabe Harris is obviously going to be a starting level player on this defense, but does like Chris Jones, Quintavious Johnson, maybe Ella Medozi, though I doubt Medozi will be that guy in game one, start at that outside linebacker spot. I would agree with you on Maddox. It seems like he has passed Ja'Cory Thomas on the depth chart and is going to be starting at that safety spot opposite KJ Bolden. I'd maybe still lean Daniel Harris getting the start against Marshall, but Ellis Robinson's going to play a lot. And that's a game where the Tennessee game is when I think we really find out how that cornerback rotation looks in terms of who starts and how, if at all, they end up rotating there. And then with Gaston, I agree with you. I just think to this point with the camp that he's had, like they're still going to rotate at guard. They're still going to find ways to get Michael Inouye and Daniel Calhoun snaps. But with everything we've continued to hear from Gaston, and you just see him out there on the practice field, he is just physically different in a group that, for the most part, is pretty well-regarded offensive linemen in terms of stature, in terms of what they might bring to the next level. I don't know that there has been a player who has had a better fall camp than what we have seen from Juan Gaston. And he was someone who, maybe we thought going into camp he could factor in to that right guard rotation. Now he looks to be at the front of the line after 2 great weeks of practice.
Let me just squeeze in one final thing with you before we let you go, because I know you got a busy day in Athens today with Kirby Smart speaking one final time before game week. We started the show by talking about the Georgia-Tennessee game. Connor, I just think this game is gigantic for Georgia. 3 top 10 teams would have lost by the time Georgia plays Tennessee. That kind of gives Georgia a little bit of space in the national conversation for to win. You only have 2 true road games remaining after this. If you had 1 win in hand in September, that's a really big deal. I just think that there is so much for Georgia to gain, plus proving that it kind of has the same level of dominance at Neyland Stadium, a place that's been really comfortable for it the last 4 years. I think that'd be big too. I just think any way you slice it, Georgia fans probably aren't talking enough about how big this Georgia-Tennessee game is.
Yeah, and it's something where, in part because of the way the schedule falls, it allows us to, I think, focus on it a little bit more with Marshall and Austin Peay as warm-ups. And, I was thinking today, Gunnar Stockton, his first career start coming up in Sanford Stadium in a few weeks here. Jake Fromm, when he was a freshman in 2017, he went on the road that day in Neyland Stadium, and they won 41-0. And, the Notre Dame game was nice. The Mississippi State game was a nice moment because I believe Mississippi State was ranked going into that game. But that Neyland Stadium visit and the beatdown that Georgia put down on Tennessee that day really established Georgia as a national title team this year. I'm not quite going as far to predict that Georgia's going to beat Tennessee 41-0 like that happened that day. But I think that's a game where we're going to find out, is this a Georgia team that is national championship caliber? Because they've got a very difficult schedule coming out of that. Their next game after Tennessee is Bama. A game I think you and I both agree, just for everything that has gone on with that series, is just a must win. But this is a Georgia team where it's a Tennessee team where, yes, there's a ton of talk about the quarterback position, but this is a team that under Josh Heupel has really been more of a defense and running team than maybe we're willing to give them credit for. And if Georgia can go on the road and win a game against a team like that, I think that's going to answer a lot of the questions about the toughness, both physical and mental, that this team possesses in 2025.
Connor, great stuff. Look forward to reading plenty from you at DawgNation.com. Getting ready for a big season here coming up. Can't wait to experience it with you and, of course, read your coverage of it. And we'll talk to you very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Another great guest coming up. We'll get ready to say hello to Jake Fromm in just a moment. Prior to that, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, boy, I've heard from folks even just this week who've made plans to be a part of our DawgNation cruise coming up in April. And when you think about a Royal Caribbean cruise, I want you thinking kind of several months ahead. You get the best savings, of course, when you book as soon as you possibly know it, plus to be able to be a part of not just the incredible experience on board Utopia of the Seas, but the special DawgNation theme events when it comes to this great DawgNation cruise on board Utopia of the Seas, a ship really unlike any other you may have been on before, kind of the newest in the Oasis class of ships. Can't wait for you to be there with us this upcoming April. It's April 20th through the 24th, sailing from Port Canaveral, convenient port to drive to if you live in Georgia. Going to Nassau in the Bahamas. By the way, the brand new Royal Beach Club in Nassau will be open when we get there. How about Perfect Day Coco Cay? Of course, we're going to be back on board that when it comes to an amazing experience like this. It's April the 20th through the 24th. Can't wait for you to be there with us. Hundreds of you will be. So secure your spot right now while you can. Give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. We'll see you April 20th through the 24th, 2026, for our DawgNation cruise on board Utopia of the Seas. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, for a couple of minutes before we bring on Jake Fromm. Let me start with this. It has been announced that this fall, Auburn will be retiring Cam Newton's jersey. Now, this in itself is somewhat interesting because I don't know that I just think Auburn's a very different kind of team when it comes to stuff like this. Obviously, there's a lot of interesting stuff that went on with Cam Newton. I don't know that every team in the SEC would retire Newton's jersey, but Auburn's certainly going to. He helped them get a national championship, and goodness knows they, as a program, have made that seem virtually impossible since then. So I reckon that is a level of success they would have never achieved without him. So why not retire his jersey? It is also worth pointing out for this audience that when Auburn is retiring Cam Newton's jersey is also notable. It will be in October, the same date that Georgia goes there. Big night game, home environment. You obviously want to make that as big as possible. Retire the jersey of Cam Newton. So we just talked a lot about the Tennessee game. Another reason why that's important, and I hate to be this way, y'all, I do think the Auburn game on the road for Georgia is really, really tough. I do. And I do believe they're going to pull out all the stops. And, of course, as a Georgia fan, you don't want to lose that game. You don't want to lose that game. But to me, this is an example of one of the things that we've sort of talked about before. Games that have kind of been classified as sort of the easy games for Georgia in the past, like an Auburn, I would say in a year like this, I believe that Auburn's going to be improved. Hugh Freeze is the butt of jokes. Their recruiting's kind of in the tank. But their transfer portal work was actually better than most. And that environment already pretty big, made even bigger by the retirement of Cam Newton's jersey. Speaking of teams in the SEC named Tigers, the former LSU coach, Ed Orgeron, seems to be intimating that he would like to be back in the coaching profession. His buyout and his buyout payments are, I guess, about to run out. Orgeron wants to coach again. And listen, the way it ended for Orgeron at LSU is pretty ugly. They probably had the worst defense of a national championship in 2020 that anyone's had in modern times. That's probably true. But honestly, Orgeron's also a pretty good program builder too. And on the way to winning that national title in 2019, which may be the best team of all time, there's no doubt that Orgeron made LSU better in the process. In other words, I wouldn't laugh at the idea of Orgeron coaching again. He's another one of these guys that sort of ends up being the butt of jokes. But I think there are a lot of teams in the SEC, by the way, that could certainly do worse than Ed Orgeron. And if you gave me the choice of another kind of high-profile potential hire, like certainly Bill Belichick at North Carolina or what we're hearing now about John Gruden, give me a guy who's done it and had success at the college level. I'll take Ed Orgeron in a situation like that. Think about the kind of jobs in the SEC that could come open. I think a lot of those teams could do a lot worse than Ed Orgeron as their coach, even if it's just a short-term proposition. In the day and age of NIL and transfer portal and radical realignment and change all the time, honestly, thinking much beyond the short term, I'm not quite so sure in college football it makes much sense to do that here these days. One more real quick I'll give you. Ohio State has named a starting quarterback, Julian Sayin. No surprise here. And I'll just sort of briefly say this. So game one, it's Ohio State against Texas. We know what Arch Manning can be. We know the attention that he's gotten. Julian Sayin, by comparison, a lot less discussion. But in that particular game, Julian Sayin's the one that gets to throw to Jeremiah Smith. So it's not impossible to think that Sayin could outplay Arch in that week one game. And boy, wouldn't that be an interesting scenario if that does occur that way. So just keep that in mind. We'll preview that a lot, obviously, in the weeks to come. For now, though, here on DawgNation Daily, we'll get ready to do a Kroger Fresh Take and welcome on Jake Fromm to the program here today. Jake, it's great to have you here. Thanks for your time. Obviously getting close to the start of the season. I know you're as excited about that as we are. So thank you for being here as part of a Kroger Fresh Take here today.
Always glad to be on the show, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
It's thrilled. I'm thrilled that you're here. So we talked a lot off the top of the show about what I really believe is a game for Georgia against Tennessee that, in comparison to all the hype for Georgia, Texas, and all the hype for Georgia, Alabama, with good reason, by the way, there's a reason those games are being talked about. The Georgia-Tennessee game, I think, is just as big, if not bigger, and it's probably an overlooked storyline right now, maybe not getting as much attention as it deserves. You're a great one to ask about this because, some of your best moments as a Georgia quarterback kind of came at Neyland Stadium, 2 dominant wins in 2017 and 2019. So let me start with this year. How big do you think the Georgia game at Tennessee is, given everything that Georgia sort of has set up for it after that game?
Yeah, I don't think it's the biggest test of all tests, but now I also agree this is the first real identifier of where this football team is at and where it can be later on in the future. I'm not saying a loss here, ruins the chances of anything the Dogs want to do later on in the postseason. However, I do think, just like you're saying, Brandon, this is the first big test. Let's figure out where we're at as a football team, where Gunner is at. There's a lot of things for Gunner and the offense and the football team to figure out in these first two football games and these first two contests. But, man, at Tennessee, this is not an easy place to play. It is much easier to play if you kind of go about it the way we did, of get up on Tennessee early. I'm assuming the game plan will be to be aggressive early and get after these guys and take the crowd out of it. Man, I got to give credit where credit is due. Neyland Stadium is a very, very loud place to play, and they can do a really good job if the Volunteers are in that football game, and it's going to be a fun contest to watch.
And when I go back to like your time playing there, 2017 certainly, dominant win in 2019, a game you played great in. To me, that was some of the early moments for Kirby Smart where – I came away thinking, man, this just has a chance to be a different kind of program than what Georgia's been before. Because, when I was a kid, Jake, winning at Tennessee, sort of kind of veered into almost impossible direction. And certainly if you did win, it was like a hobnail boot, last second type of deal where you're just, thankful to have gotten it and you sort of talked about it for the rest of your life. All of a sudden, by the time Kirby gets there and you're the quarterback, now you're winning like 41-0 and you're blowing them out in 2019. Eric Stokes, the big, forced fumble, kind of sticks out in your mind there on that. To me, sort of, and it's continued since then. Blowout win in 2021, blowout win in 2023. Sort of nothing to me speaks to the dominance that Kirby has found at Georgia, which you were part of, more so than the fact that in these kind of previous trips to Neyland Stadium, loud stadium, tough place to play, Georgia has really flexed in those games. And I think a lot of Georgia fans are curious, can you still do that now? Is this still the kind of team that can do what previous Kirby teams that you were part of have done in Neyland Stadium?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the talent level is there. Kirby, philosophy-wise, still holding a huge standard in the program. When it comes to the philosophy of the season, Kirby does a fantastic job of making each and every week just as important as the last and, weeks moving forward. So the first thing that this team wants to do is win the SEC East. Well, how do you win I guess I take that back. This is not a East versus West anymore, but you have to win these SEC matchups and take advantage of them when you get them. The schedule is always tough, and going up into Tennessee is going to be a very tough place to play. But if anybody can figure it out, it will be Kirby and Gunner at the helm.
No, absolutely. You mentioned also a moment ago that when you guys had success, they kind of got off to those fast starts. And obviously, that's an issue that kind of plagued Georgia a year ago. Well, everybody's got their spies and their sort of people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. Supposedly on Saturday, the Georgia offense, we're led to believe anyway, to the extent this can be trusted, got off to a faster start in this scrimmage than it maybe had the previous week and maybe, frankly, more so than it did in some of the games it played a year ago. And I'm kind of curious because that's what Georgia fans sort of want. And maybe the only thing interesting about, like, say, Marshall, Austin Peay to begin the season, and it's crucial in the more important games that come after that, can you come out of the locker room, whether it's with a really good play script or just like the right mindset, can you get off to a faster start to make the rest of the game seemingly easier because of it? As someone who's been sort of a part of these games, like, what does it take to get off to a faster start than sort of what Georgia has at times certainly was able to do in most of the games in 2024?
Yeah, I don't want to put too much on Coach Bobo here, but for me, I think most of the fast start stuff comes from a philosophy from the offensive coordinator and the play caller. I think it's him getting the entire offensive unit on board. Hey, guys, we are going to be aggressive this football game. We're going to come out swinging, and you're going to see that with my play calls. When the rest of the players feel that, the receivers, the offensive line, the rest of the skill positions, when they feel that and they see that from a play caller perspective, man, they buy in. They're like, man, I'm going to get my shot and my opportunity at any given time. And I think it really gets, man, the offensive juices going. It's much like a basketball game, and there's a rhythm and there's a flow to it. And, man, when you are firing off shots, it is really kind of cool to see the whole thing happen and get into motion. So I think it comes from the top down. Obviously, as a quarterback, it's a lot on you to be as efficient as you can in those moments and make those big plays. And it's a high risk, high reward because you don't want to get off to a slower start than you would have otherwise. But man, I think the more you practice, the more you rep it, and the more that you commit to it as your philosophy on offense, the better you're going to be throughout the rest of the season.
So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but I am genuinely curious. So when it comes to like what we're told, like, hey, the play script to begin the game, and you hear this a lot in the NFL, and I think, it's a part of the thing in college too. Like, how scripted is it? And is it a script based on what the quarterback's comfortable with, or just what the OCC's based on the opposition? And can you check out of it? Is it one of those things of, hey, we know we're running these 15 plays no matter what? I mean, as someone who's not been in that role, I'm curious, like, how scripted is the beginning of a game, typically speaking?
Well, I've been under both philosophies. One, let's just take, last year, for example, with the Lions, where, coach kind of held his cards close and he's going to call it how he sees fit. And I've also been in other situations where, hey, the first 15 to 30 plays are pretty much scripted. There's a first down call and a second down call, and it doesn't matter if these plays are coming off the rack. So it just kind of depends on the play caller. For the most part, in my experience, especially in college, the first 15, there's going to be scenarios. Hey, you're first and 10, you're second and long, you're second and medium. It's kind of a reactionary type thing, but most of those things get ironed out to start the game. Makes the play caller's job easier, where you don't have to think. You say, hey, this is what we committed to early in the week. This is what we saw. This is why we like this play. The quarterback knows it's coming. Even a lot of the skill positions know certain concepts are coming. So it helps everybody on offense to know what's coming and to what to be prepared for. And it just kind of depends on the play caller to finish up. But it could really be scripted all the way down to the top, and you may be late into the second quarter before you start coming off script.
I want to squeeze in one more topic with you. It's Jake Fromm here as part of a Kroger Fresh Take here today on DawgNation Daily. And of course, everybody enjoying back to school. You also kind of this time of year kind of getting back to like football. High school has started. College is getting ready to start up. That means you're getting set up for all your big tailgate parties and hanging out with friends and enjoying football. Really probably the best time of year. And obviously our friends from Kroger make it all so fun. The food you need, the drinks in the cooler, plates, napkins, everything to make this football season, all your tailgates and watch parties as fun as they can be. Your local Kroger's got you covered on that today. So also become a Kroger Boost member to enjoy all of that too. Kroger.com/boost for more on how you can get free grocery delivery and pickup, twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying at Kroger. A lot of ways to make this season more convenient. Our friends at Kroger have got you on all of that. All right, Jake, final thing for you, and it's a question I've asked you probably 17 different times. But the word on the street is that Gunnar Stockton had a really good scrimmage on Saturday. A couple nice scoring drives, didn't need to see anything else, was able to kind of sort of, take the pads off maybe and just kind of basically knowing the job was well done for that particular day. So here we are, doorstep of the season. 2 Saturdays from now, Georgia will play, and at that point in time, Gunnar Stockton will be off and running for his first full season as Georgia's starting quarterback. As somebody who knows Gunnar, but also knows the position, the pressure that's involved in this, how good do you believe that Gunnar Stockton can be this year?
Yeah, I think Gunnar's ready. I think he is really owning his role. Everything I'm hearing, everything I'm seeing. Honestly, as a fan of Gunnar, of him as a person, friends with Gunnar, know his family really well. Man, I, as a fan, am just so excited for him and this football season, this opportunity that he has in front of him. He knows the standard that is there to be a quarterback at the University of Georgia. There's going to be high expectations for him, but I think he's in a spot where he can really handle it. He's got a great group around him, got a great team around him, a revamped wide receiver room, an offensive line that is just striked and poised to be ready to be able to do both, throw the ball and run the ball. So I think the philosophy there is there from Coach Bobo. I just think all the stars are lining up, and I'm not saying there won't be some learning curves early, or some hiccups or, a few bumps in the road. But I think Gunnar is poised to be a high caliber starter here in the SEC.
Jake, I love it. I appreciate it. Always so great to talk to you. I hope you have a great week. We'll look forward to doing it very soon with you here as part of Kroger Fresh Take on DawgNation Daily. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. See you next week.
Great stuff from Jake Fromm. And speaking of great stuff, that's what our golden shoe is today. Let me just say this from the bottom of my soul. The fact that so many of you are so willing to kind of help us support those who support our show, y'all, that's just what we do, right? It's a place for Georgia fans to get together, but also for the companies that want to reach those Georgia fans. This is our livelihood. This is how we do what we do. And I tell you, I never cease to be amazed at how kind and generous all of you are with your willingness to sort of try out the folks we tell you about, including our friends from Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. We knew you would love it. The reaction to it's been great thus far, including our golden shoe today. Shane Holiday, who, by the way, is also a big part of our DawgNation cruise. Shane's a great guy. And he says, BA, which one? Decided to try the original and the Blackberry Bramble. It's a wonderful picture of, at his local store there, the Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. So Shane has found it. He's enjoying it. I'm telling you right now, there's all kinds of great choices. You are going to love this, especially if you've never had a hard cider before. You're going to love it. And we appreciate folks like Shane who are already trying it, making a big part of what they do. We've heard from others too. It's just an awesome thing to see. Shane, well-deserved golden shoe going out to you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Lousy, stinking Gators, the only thing I appreciate about you is the fact that, frankly, you're not that hard to get over on. That's been true now for 1,746 days. We believe it's true again this fall. Can't wait for it. Going to be a fun one. Y'all have a great day. Thank you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time, do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Here's another way you can sort of tell that the season is kind of getting here. It feels like to me, and I know that's an hour show, but it feels like to me that hour flew by. Wow, it felt like it went by fast. Hope it did for you. It certainly did for me. Hope everybody's good today here too. Let's see what else. Here on YouTube, Kevin says he thinks that Robinson and Daniel play at the same time. Everett will move inside during the obvious passing downs. Maybe so. I think they do like Aguero. And I think one way or another, at least three cornerbacks for Georgia are going to play a pretty good bit. I think that here is the big change for Georgia at cornerback, the best that I can tell, is that Ellis Robinson has emerged. Now, does that mean that he's overtaken Daniel Harris? Well, not necessarily. And by the way, it's not even necessarily a good thing if he does, right? It's like, I really try not to play favorites with all this kind of stuff because there's a lot to like about Daniel Harris. Big, long frame. He's experienced in the program. I mean, it's not obvious that Georgia is better with Robinson than Harris. It's only a confirmation of Robinson's recruiting ranking if he starts. That's why some people kind of gravitate towards it. So I'm not certainly saying, boy, if you're Georgia, you gotta make sure Robinson's in there. All I'm judging this on, once again, from people who are a little closer to it, all I'm judging this on is that it seems like Robinson has now made his move and is now the kind of guy, unlike a year ago, that Georgia would be more than happy to have in the game, comfortable playing him. So, whether he or Harris starts may prove to be a distinction that doesn't make much of a difference. They may both play plenty, but there does get to a point when you got to sort of decide who your guys are. And we'll see what happens by then. And the fourth man in this conversation is also DeMello Jones. I can't quite figure that one out because unlike some guys where it's kind of quiet, I feel like you hear a lot on DeMello Jones. And some of this has been like private conversations for me. I can't quite figure that one out yet. I won't pretend to. But I do believe, and I've always believed, that DeMello Jones is a really promising prospect. So it could be they have four cornerbacks they feel okay playing. I would say they at least have three, and maybe DeMello makes it four. And that's not a bad thing. I also, as I said before, I wouldn't count out, you talk about in an obvious passing situation, they'll move Everett to the star. The truth is, when they've played games with that star position, it's been another safety that's played there. Georgia wants that star to be a good, stout, 200-pound type dude. Let's see what else. Wesley Spruce says y'all are dead wrong in the running backs and the defensive line, so not quite so sure what was that in reference to, but is that right? Can the audience hear this, or is that just to me? All right, so Kaylee came over and said does something to me. Let's see if we can put this out to the entire audience. So Kaylee says that in the last couple of minutes, Auburn has decided to pencil whip its competition and claim 4 new national championships. Kaylee, so what can you tell us about these new national titles now claimed by Auburn? What years are these?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, let's go. Okay. It's 1910, 1914, 1958, and 2004 with a total of 9.
Okay, so 2004 I was alive for. I wonder what the justification is for claiming that, because now listen, I will say in that BCS era, I thought Auburn had a pretty good argument to play in the BCS title game that year. I do remember that. That was a very good Auburn team. But just but what would be the claim of we get a national championship? And I believe some of the folks in our audience who may, if you are old enough to remember 1958, I believe that team was on probation, which is funny because even back then, but I'm pretty sure Auburn was on probation in the late 50s, which is, like I said, it's an amazing thing to consider. That we sort of think of like the 1950s as this like idyllic time, this, sort of quaint past. Auburn was still cheating, but I believe they were on probation in 58. 04, I'd be curious to know what their argument is. However, I've said this before, and I think that, frankly, if Auburn's going to do this, I believe that Georgia should claim the 1946 national title. I think that Georgia is well within its rights to claim that national title, and I wish they would. So, also, like if you just go back and claim like titles from like the early 1910s, who really even knows the difference? Like you should just make up something. Like no one's going to go back and check it. It's an interesting thing for Auburn to do. Wouldn't it be a little easier to do like sort of one at a time as opposed to like trying to smuggle in all 4 at once? Sin Atlanta, I guess, on the subject of the fact that Georgia doesn't quite have the big non-conference early season game. Yeah, they certainly played plenty of those. Just so happens they don't quite have one this year. I think the Tech game sort of functions at the end of this year, especially with all the media love that Tech's getting. If Georgia, like my number one argument against playing Georgia Tech has always been that Georgia doesn't get credit for playing Georgia Tech. There are a lot of like, say, Big Ten teams that don't play any Power 4 non-conference opponents, where everybody in the SEC does. Georgia plays Georgia Tech every year. So even Georgia fans are guilty of this. This year we don't have the big non-conference game, some Georgia fans might say. But that's because they don't count Tech as a non-conference game. They just sort of think of it as a kind of a non-entity, a thing that Georgia always does. And so I've often said, in a year in which Georgia doesn't have the Clemson, Oregon type thing going on, it's almost like Georgia doesn't get any credit for playing Tech. I mean, golly, how many times have we heard Haynes King is the most unstoppable quarterback in college football? So maybe if that's the case, then Georgia ought to get credit for playing the non-conference game. But if you play Tech and don't get any credit for beating them, then there's no point in playing them.
A reminder, it was going to be UCLA this year.
That's right. Would have been you. Thank you, Jay Black. It would have been UCLA this year, which honestly, I'm not even sure they're much better than Marshall is. So, by the way, Foster, who is it that mentioned this? Who mentioned this? By the way, Jonathan Aaron kind of wondering what Cam Newton may be dressed like when he gets his jersey retired. Yeah, Newton is known for some pretty odd fashion choices. Like the one that took the cake. I mean, a lot of scarves and things like that. The one that really took the cake for me is when he had a foxtail pinned to his jacket one time, which I just thought was like, I'd never seen anybody do that in my entire life. I'd never seen somebody pin a foxtail to their jacket, but he did. So I guess if it's that memorable, he must have done something right. Frank Patterson says, who won the 2004 SEC title? So Auburn won the SEC in 2004. Somebody mentioned this a moment ago. Georgia won the SEC in 2005. Georgia lost at Auburn in 2004, and that was a very good Auburn team. That's the one that had Jason Campbell at quarterback, Brown and Cadillac as the two running backs. Very good Auburn team. It was a very good Auburn team. And I think probably an Auburn team that was deserving of playing in the BCS title game against USC. But here's the thing. They didn't. And the argument is, I would say, fairly convincing that they should have. Once again, they didn't. So I don't quite know how you get national title out of that. But it's also a reminder of something we say a lot. Teams argue in whatever is in their best interest. And I try to get Georgia fans to understand this in 2023 when we were like pitching a fit and throwing a tantrum because Georgia missed the playoff. And Georgia fans didn't want to do it because they were sad because Georgia lost to Alabama. And they didn't have the energy to kind of make the playoff debate. Looking back on it, given everything we've seen in college football since then, should Georgia have been in the playoff in 2023? Yes, they should have. And you got to remember, when it comes to arguing on behalf of your team, the only virtue is winning the argument, right? It's like, this is all nonsense anyway. This is all just being made up as we go along. Auburn just claimed 4 national titles out of thin air. We're making all of this up as we go along. So you might as well just argue for whatever is in your own best interest, which in 2023 was for Georgia to make the playoff. Okay, so I do have a confirmation here. Jim McLaughlin, thank you. So how about this? First of all, shout out to me for knowing this. Shout out to Jim for confirming it. He says, right, Brandon, the 1958 Auburn team was on probation. I saw them beat Florida State in Tallahassee by a score of something like 59-0. Can you imagine? This is an amazing moment in R.S. Andrews cool-down history. I pulled out a fact out of thin air just like that, and someone who actually saw a game has now confirmed this was true. This is quite a moment in the history of our program. Thank you. Garrison Tucker says recommendations on what TV package to have to watch college football this season. Well, I may be the wrong one to ask about this because I'm telling you right now, when it comes to watching college football, I still want cable. And for the life of me, I don't understand the argument in favor of anything else. I really don't. I guess some people do like YouTube because they have the multi-view screen thing, but I can't hardly do that. I feel like some of y'all are lying. Some of y'all act like you're watching like 4 things at once. I know good and well you're not. Now, I'm a terrible multitasker, but I feel like most of you aren't quite as good at like watching the multiple things as you act like you are. I mean, you're pretty much watching one thing at a time. You only got 2 eyes. So I still like cable. And, we had this thing come out the other day, and y'all are going to get me on a soapbox. I don't mean to, but where, okay, well now ESPN and Fox are going to like bundle their 2 packages together to allow folks to kind of watch football this year if they want to. That's just cable. That's cable. We have torn down cable, and now we're trying to rebuild cable, and we're going to act like we invented something new when we did. There's a life lesson in that. Also, here's the thing about, and I swear people don't bring this up enough. Here is, to me, the number one argument against streaming sports. And people make it seem like you're old for saying this, but the truth is, this is just a fact. If I'm watching Notre Dame on Peacock, because sometimes they stream on Peacock, okay, to get into the Notre Dame game, I have to click Peacock. I have to then click the game. And you have to do that. Well, if I want to switch back over to watch the whatever thing, now I got to exit out of the platform and go to the new thing. Whereas in the old school cable thing, you get like the little channel thing going, especially the new kind of back button where it kind of gives you an array of options and you just kind of click one. I mean, you're flying from game to game to game if you're using TV. I am yet to, and listen, in my own life, because I'm kind of a late adopter on things. So let's say I've had a busy day. And let's say, like a lot of y'all do, busy day, you come home, you plop down in the chair, you get up the remote, and you sort of see what's on. Well, somewhere in the last 5 years, my kind of plop down, get the remote, went from let me look at the channel guide to see what's on TV, and let me start scrolling through the platforms and seeing what's on them. Somewhere along the way, I became a platform scroller more so than a channel guide, scroller. I just changed. So my TV viewing habits have changed. I'm a lot more like platform based than I used to be. When it comes to sports is still way better on TV. It's just way better on TV. Especially for those of you, we like to give a little, consumer advice when it comes to gambling. If you are live betting a game that you are watching on a streaming platform, you are at least 60 seconds behind the sports book. And read, like, say, Flyboys from Michael Lewis, one of those books about what Wall Street guys do to, like, get stock information as quickly as it's available. Putting yourself at a 60-second disadvantage compared to the book, you might as well light your money on fire. Because I'm at the games. I know how far the TV is from the normal game. It's never been farther. It used to be when you're sitting in the press box, you could watch the play, turn and look at the screen, then watch it kind of live on TV, pre-replay. Well, now it's getting harder and harder to do that. And on a streaming platform, you're even further delayed than that. If you are live betting these games that you are watching on a 90-second delay, the book is not on a 90-second delay. If you're watching the game on a 90-second delay and then live betting it as if it's all happening right there in the moment, good luck with that.
Only argument for streaming sports: incredible picture quality.
Okay, so did they hear you say that, Jay?
Yes, that was on the air.
Okay, so picture quality. I will say that I am not a great judge of that because I'm colorblind. So I sort of know. I know the difference between like clear and not clear, but I think 4K. I don't have 4K, I don't think. But I think 4K is probably wasted on me. I'm not even sure I would recognize the difference. But I would say that for some people, that probably is a very noticeable thing, especially if you've got, we have like the S video cables and stuff like that makes it all, work the way it's supposed to. Maybe that's the case. I'm more like DT, who says changing games is harder on with streaming. That's the big thing. I mean, if you want to, because most of us, if Georgia's not playing, I mean, I'm working that remote like crazy, trying to go from game to game to game to game to game. Because like I said before, I can't really do the multi-TV setup. My brain's not wired that way. I can only watch one thing at a time anyway. I'd rather just have one game on and flip back and forth. But I want to be able to work that remote pretty quick, and it's hard. Rambo says we've come a long way from switching between ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, ESPN, all the 1, 2, 3, et cetera, SEC network. But that's sort of still what I do. And I have yet to be convinced that's not better. I really have. I'm yet to be convinced that's not better. For like other content, I'm sort of done with TV. I can't remember the last time I watched a show on television. I can't remember the last time. It's been at least 5 years. I probably haven't watched a show on television in like 5 years. A thing where I switched to a channel of something that was currently being broadcast, joined in progress. I haven't done that in at least 5 years. But sports-wise, still the superior experience. And by the way, when TV, linear TV as we know, when it goes away, y'all better get ready. People are talking about ESPN, direct to consumer being $30 a month, not to turn this into Bloomberg, but as someone who kind of halfway pays attention to some of this kind of stuff, I don't believe $30 a month is even close to a break-even price. I don't think it's even close, especially when you're adding like WWE and stuff like that into the mix. I don't think $30 a month is even close to a break-even price. That is the teaser rate, I personally believe. Let's see what else. SEM Dog remembers the old days of setting up 2 or 3 TVs. See, I feel like there's more of that now than there used to be. Although I do know what you're talking about. Like, hey, the special day, you're bringing the extra TVs. I've definitely, I guess, done that and seen other people do that, especially back in the day when it's like a big, TVs used to be sort of shaped like a box car, kind of like try to carry them in. But I feel like that, the only thing in life that's gotten less expensive are TVs. Everything else is like way more expensive. Like fast food's 3 times as expensive as it was 6 months ago. Or not 6 months ago, but certainly 2 years ago. Way more expensive. But TV is the one thing that gets cheaper. So now, because TVs are this wide and they're, way cheap, everybody's got these multiple TV setups now. I'm not a huge fan of that necessarily. All right, let's get some more comments. Christy says we pay more for streaming than our cell phones. So I heard the other day, because y'all, I'm sure not surprised to hear this. I am not super well versed in like the bills. I don't pay a lot of the bills around our house. I found out the other day what we pay for all this content, internet plus all these platforms and stuff like that. I almost vomited. Like I could not believe it. Could not believe it. Whitefield says, can we do a football fantasy league? I do have a couple of ideas. I'm trying to figure out how to like logistically achieve it. But I do have a couple of ideas about something. It probably won't be fantasy because that's a lot for me to manage. I mean, most of you know I'm a little bit of a mess. That's a lot for me to manage. But I do have a couple of ideas. Like one of the things I'd love to do, to me, there's, and you can't, like I've tried to invent a way to do this with college. And because there are so many teams, it's just really hard. But to me, like the most fun thing in the world, just super fun, doesn't have to be for big dollars, just kind of fun, is just the sort of straight up survivor pool in the NFL. Especially if you do like the modern survivor. The way that survivor works now is that most of the places that do it kind of make the special games their own thing. For instance, Thanksgiving Day is its own survivor. That's not connected to the week those games take place. The 3 games of Thanksgiving, that's its own deal. And Christmas would be the same way or something like that, which means you've got to save a team for Thanksgiving. It's just a way of kind of making it harder, right? So the modern survivor is for the big standalone days, they make that a separate week for the purpose of the survivor. And it's not point spreads. It's just pick one winner. And when you've used them, you can't use them again. So you keep going until you lose or you run out of teams. It's really fun. I wish there was a way to do that with college. And I keep kind of coming back to there are just too many teams. Even if you try to do it with just the SEC, well, heck, most of the year, most of the good SEC teams are huge favorites. And so you can't really do that either. But to me, one of the most fun things to do with an audience would be like a straight survivor, but you'd have to probably do it with the NFL. And we wouldn't do it for money, right? We would just do it for fun, but we may do a prize. Trent Burdett says, what's the issue with retiring Cam Newton's jersey? Cam had no issue at Auburn, had some success in the NFL. If you have an issue with retiring Cam's jersey, you say the same thing about Stetson Bennett. Well, Georgia's not going to retire Stetson Bennett's jersey. That's the one huge difference there. Now, maybe they should, but they're not going to. There was a lot about how Cam Newton ended up at Auburn that was a little bit weird. It just was. Trust me, I lived through 2010. A lot of controversy about would he play or not. Not every SEC team would want to revisit all of that, even if he did win a national championship. Auburn would. By the way, Savion Hyder is just committed to Michigan, the 5-star running back. Not really a factor for Georgia as of late anyway, but it is one of the big names in the class going to Michigan. About Newton, I have no problem saying one of the best single-season performances I've ever seen. You can make a case. For me, Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in college football I've ever seen. Cam Newton may be next, though. Cam Newton may be next. And, for instance, if you want to say that Newton is better than Tim Tebow, I might listen to that. I think the Burrow is still better. But Newton may be better than Tebow, a guy that oftentimes gets mentioned. I think that Tebow was. The AP just did their, their all-time All-American team or something like that. I think that Tebow was the quarterback. You can make a case that Newton was better than Tebow, but I think it still is no less true that not every team in the SEC would retire Cam Newton's jersey. But let's see what else. G. Grace points out that Cam already has a statue at Auburn. Yeah, so there's that too, I guess. Frank Patterson says Newton better than Tebow, but not better than Manziel. I don't know, man. Cam was good. I mean, listen, Cam was very, very, very good. I don't know that everything that went on during the Newton era at Auburn is necessarily something to be proud of, but Cam was very, 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 very good. There is no doubt about that. And plus, when you think about the sort of team that Newton led to a national title, I don't know that there's some sort of stat. Some of y'all know this better than I do. I want to say this is not probably it, but there's something like this. One of y'all will get this better than me. I want to say there's only 2 guys from the 2010 Auburn team that ever even played in the NFL. That was the least talented team to win a national title in the BCS era. Had to be, right? Other than you had Fairley on defense and Cam at quarterback. Other than that, no one has taken a worse team to a title than Cam did. So no one disputes the talent here. Jonathan Aaron says, what about Vince Young? Vince Young was great. I think that history is pretty kind to Young because he played great in what at the time was sort of thought to be the game of the century. And I think that has elevated Vince Young. And, Texas was not, USC was a huge favorite over Texas going into that game. So Vince Young has the amazing performance. Texas wins, beats the kind of classic USC team that had, and at least in some form or fashion, was kind of a back-to-back national champion. They'd shared it in 2003. So that USC is sort of thought to be this unbelievable team, but when Texas wins the game, classic Rose Bowl, now Vince Young is thought of in a completely different category. So I think when you're thinking about this, boy, history is very kind to Young because of the big game he had in the big moment. And his entire legacy is elevated because of that. But that's not really what people were saying about Young prior to that. Not to say he was a bad quarterback, just the sort of historic figure he's thought of now. A lot of that came because of the sort of Herculean performance in the big game. All right, let's see. Let me go to Facebook. And then we'll get ready to bounce out of here. Frank Patterson says, who would you put as your all-time SEC running back and what year did he play at Georgia? We already know that. I still think that Herschel Walker is the best player of all time. And, of course, our guy Frank Patterson loves the history of Georgia running backs. Anonymous Handle says, what would you pay for a virtual reality experience to watch the games? So here's what I believe, Anonymous. I I do think, and I think I've said this in this space before, I do think we're due for a major technological advance in how we watch games. There's the one theater that we've talked about before that has like the immersive experience where like it's almost like the Sphere in Vegas where it's like you sort of feel like you're in the stadium. I feel like that's an example of this. I think that like drone technology is going to get to the point where like drones can be used as cameras, and all of a sudden now you're watching the game from something other than just the sideline view. And I think that people are going to probably like that. You see some of that now in small doses, but you may see more of that in the future where, you know, it's kind of a 360 degree type experience. I think people are going to like that. I think that we're due for a big upgrade at some point in time. And listen, maybe people just kind of go back to watching it the old way, you know, kind of sideline view type way. But it seems like we had a major upgrade in this in kind of a long time. And I think we could see some of that. All right, let's see if I can get the Facebook comments to load up here. By the way, Anonymous Handle has been to a show in the Sphere in Vegas. Yeah, I have not seen it. I would love to. I do kind of wonder sometimes, and Christy said this too. So I am pretty prone to motion sickness, especially if you go to the theme park, they have like the motion, like the simulation rides. Too much motion simulation will kind of get me in trouble. I'm trying to get the Facebook comments to load. Too much like motion simulation will get me in trouble. Well, the Sphere has just tons of that. I do wonder how my like sort of susceptibility to like motion sickness, I wonder how that might play into that. Let's get some Facebook comments. Eric Smith says, which wide receiver is going to have a breakout year in 2025? Well, from a national standpoint, compared to their previous performance, I think you got to put both Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas on there because I think there's a chance that both those guys are far better at Georgia than they were at their previous stop. And I think that'd be a big deal. Josh Hobbs says if Gurley hadn't been suspended in 2014, he was going to do amazing things that season. I do agree. Could have very easily won the Heisman Trophy. I think that's right. Who did win the Heisman in 2014? Henry was 15. Jameis was 2013, right? Marcus Mariota won the Heisman in 2014. Thank you. Bill Sanders says I have Facebook blocked on his phone and computer. I'm just not a big Facebook user, except when I'm doing the show. So that's what it kind of comes down to. Josh Hobbs says he has an unpopular opinion, but I think that Todd Gurley was the best player to ever play at Georgia. Look, I've always said that my category for Gurley is I would put Gurley along with George Pickens as the most exciting players I've ever seen at Georgia. Gurley was just really exciting. He was a highlight reel, really, really exciting. Obviously, I've said before that I think that one of the things that we do a disservice with is that we're making so-and-so the best player of all time, whether it be, you know, in Georgia history, whether it be, you mentioned Gurley, some may say Brock Bowers, some say Stetson Bennett. I just think it's important to remember that Herschel Walker is, I believe, the greatest college football player of all time. And, you know, 15 years ago, everybody agreed on that. And somewhere over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, all of a sudden now, Walker is not being credited as that. And it's not because some new player or newer player has overtaken him. When they did the sort of official list of the greatest players of all time, you know, circa 2019, it was Jim Brown who was one, Herschel Walker was two. Y'all, I mean, I wasn't alive for the Jim Brown era, but I have been alive for most of this conversation. Jim Brown was never considered the greatest college player of all time. He may be the greatest pro football player of all time. I think he's in that conversation for sure. He may be the greatest lacrosse player of all time. He probably is, believe it or not. But the notion that Brown was the greatest college player of all time, that was never a part of his legacy, never a part of his resume. It's literally Herschel Walker erasure. That's what it just literally is. And I think that Georgia fans have to be careful in participating in something that's, for whatever reason, just kind of gone on the last decade, 15 years, where the legacy of Herschel Walker has been diminished as a player, not at the expense of a newer player, which might make some sense, but the expense of players who played many decades ago in their own right. Very, very strange. I'll also say that, so if you put Herschel Walker into a separate category, I still think that Nick Chubb is better than Todd Gurley. I do. I've said before, my Mount Rushmore of Georgia football, only room for 4. Herschel, Bowers, David Pollock, Nick Chubb. And it's that kind of 4th where there's going to be all kinds of debate. There are other names you could consider, but those are my 4. All right, let's get a couple more. We're going to get ready to go after that. Marshall Fleming says Cam was so good he won a national title with a horrible head coach. It is a fair point. Is that, I mean, Gene Chizik never anything really before that. Losing record at Iowa State, unhirable essentially after that, and Cam led him to a national title. So no one has ever been more of a one-man gang than Cam Newton probably was. That is true. That is certainly true. Josh Hobbs says that Burrow was the best SEC quarterback of my lifetime. I've been here since 1992. Yeah, I'm a little older than that, but Burrow's the best. Burrow's the best that I've seen. The best that I've seen. Gary Holt says I should not get motion sickness as many cruises I take. Yeah, I don't get motion sickness from cruise. And I would say, as someone who's really prone to motion sickness, if you've never been on a cruise before, you can use me as a pretty good judge on that. I don't get motion sickness on a cruise. It's a big ship. You do feel a little bit of movement, but it does not bother me. If I do one of these things where you ride to ride, it's got the screen technology where it makes it seem like you're doing all this crazy stuff. Sometimes screen technology on, like, say, theme park rides kind of gets to me a little bit. Alan Hampton says he likes the view of the game when the sky cam is offered. Yeah, I like that too. I think and that really probably was invented by the XFL, believe it or not. And I think there's probably more of that coming. Let's see what else on Facebook. By the way, to the person who mentioned the so-called unpopular opinion, I love unpopular opinions in this space. I like interesting takes. I think that makes the conversation more fun. All right. The weird thing about Facebook now, too, is it only shows like a few comments. It doesn't give you, like for like YouTube, I could scroll back to the beginning of the show if I wanted to. I can't really do that on Facebook anymore. Bill Shirley says Jim Brown wasn't the greatest college player. He just wasn't. If you said greatest NFL, greatest pro football player, I'd listen to that based on the history that, as I understand, it's certainly the best of his era. I'd put him, Jerry Rice. You got to say Brady now. That would be my list of like greatest pro football players of all time. But that was never a part of his resume of, hey, greatest college player of all time. Never a part of his resume. It was a completely new take. Anonymous Handle says he wishes there was more behind the quarterback aerial coverage. Yes, seeing what the quarterback sees, I think that's an interesting thing. One of these days, you may have the sort of thing where, you can literally choose the angle you want for your broadcast. That might be a fun thing. Lance D offering a pro tip for motion sickness in the ocean. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, like I have been like snorkeling, stuff like that, where like the waves were so rough. I actually got motion sickness in the water. Small craft, I can get a little motion sick on some of those. Christy says the bigger the boat, the less motion sick I get. I'd say that's true. I would say that's 100% true for me. All right, let's get a couple more. Jonathan Aaron says, would you want prime Barry Sanders or Jim Brown as your NFL running back? Yeah, obviously I wasn't alive for the Jim Brown era. All I know is what the legend was. Sounds like he was probably the best. Jeremy Smith's going on his first cruise, Alaskan cruise, starting on Thursday. Jeremy, do me a favor. Let us know how you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear more about that. All right. We're going to go for now. Good stuff, everyone. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on that. Very hot right now. I mean, like almost dangerously hot. So make sure you stay cool and comfortable this summer and the hot weather that's still yet to come with your AC tuned back up to factory fresh specs, courtesy of our friends at RS Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. The RS stands for rapid service. That means they show up, they get the work done for you. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles. They can deliver a smile for you. So find them online, rsandrews.com. And by the way, next week, the return of Go With The Flow presented by RS Andrews. We're looking forward to that. All right, great day, everybody. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.